There are moments when someone tells you that what you need is motivation. They say it casually, almost as if it were a simple tool you forgot to pick up. You just need to get motivated, as if energy could be summoned, like turning on a light. You hear it everywhere, in conversations with friends, in advice online, in books and talks that promise change. The idea is always the same. If you want something badly enough, motivation will appear, and once it does, everything will start moving. But for some people, this idea never quite makes sense. They don't feel a sudden spark that pushes them forward. They don't wake up filled with determination after hearing a speech or reading a quote. When others talk about finding motivation, it sounds a little like describing a language they were never taught. It's not that they refuse to act, and it's not always that they don't care. Often they care very deeply. The difficulty is somewhere else. They cannot rely on a feeling that is supposed to appear first and make everything easier afterward. Sometimes they watch others talk about motivation with confidence. People describe it as fuel, as the beginning of every achievement. Something you must gather before anything else can happen. Without it, the story goes, nothing meaningful will move forward. But their experience feels different. There are days when they work without motivation at all. They simply do what needs to be done because the moment asks for it. No excitement, no surge of inspiration, just a quiet continuation of effort. Other days, even when something matters to them, the expected feeling never arrives. The spark that is supposed to ignite action stays absent, and waiting for it begins to feel pointless. Over time, a quiet doubt forms. Maybe motivation isn't the engine everyone says it is. Maybe it's something people talk about after the fact, once things have already happened. A story we use to explain effort rather than the force that creates it. For someone who doesn't believe in motivation, life moves differently. They don't wait for the perfect feeling before beginning. They also don't trust it when it appears suddenly. Inspiration can be pleasant, but it feels unreliable. So they move through things another way. Slower, perhaps, less dramatic, without the promise that energy will carry them forward. And while the world keeps insisting that motivation is the key to everything, they quietly continue without it, unsure whether they are missing something important or simply seeing the story from a different angle. When someone says they don't believe in motivation, it is often interpreted as indifference, as if the person simply doesn't care enough to move. But Jung might ask a different question. Not whether the person lacks motivation, but whether the psyche itself refuses the demand being placed on it. Jung was attentive to the quiet signals that come from the inner life, the moments when energy disappears, not because someone is weak, but because something inside does not agree with the direction being taken. In that sense, the absence of motivation can be a message rather than a failure. From this perspective, motivation is not something that can always be manufactured. It cannot be summoned on command simply because a task exists or because the world expects movement. The psyche has its own timing, its own logic. When that rhythm is ignored, energy often fades instead of increasing. People who stop believing in motivation sometimes arrive there through experience. They may have tried to force themselves forward many times. They may have followed advice that promised a spark would appear if they pushed hard enough. And for a while, it might even have worked. But eventually, something changes. The effort begins to feel disconnected from meaning. The more they try to generate enthusiasm, the more artificial it feels. Instead of movement, there is fatigue. Jung would say this is where the inner voice becomes important. The psyche resists when it is asked to invest energy into something that feels empty or imposed. It withdraws not to sabotage the person, but to protect the deeper parts of the self. This doesn't mean the person becomes passive. In fact, people who stop relying on motivation often continue to act. They simply do it differently. They move without waiting for the emotional push that others describe. Action becomes quieter, less dramatic. The world around them may interpret this as a lack of passion. Without visible excitement, their effort can look dull or mechanical. But internally, something else is happening. Instead of chasing bursts of inspiration, they begin to pay attention to what genuinely holds their attention. In Jung's view, real energy comes from alignment with the deeper structure of the psyche. When something resonates with that deeper layer, movement happens naturally. It does not need to be forced by motivational speeches or external pressure. So when someone says they no longer believe in motivation, it may not be a rejection of effort. It may be the moment when they stop trying to ignite energy artificially and start listening to where their energy actually lives. From the outside, that change can look like withdrawal. From the inside, it often feels like the beginning of honesty. Nietzsche would likely be suspicious of the way motivation is talked about today. Not because effort or ambition are meaningless, but because the language around motivation often turns them into a moral story. A person who is motivated is seen as strong, admirable, alive. A person who is not is quietly placed on the other side of that line. For Nietzsche, this kind of moral division is always worth questioning. He often warned that societies create values that feel natural but are actually constructed to keep people moving in the same direction. Motivation, in the modern sense, fits this pattern well. It suggests that the correct way to live is with constant forward motion, visible drive, and the appearance of enthusiasm. In this story, energy becomes proof of character. If you feel motivated, it means you believe in yourself. If you struggle to feel it, something must be wrong. Perhaps you lack discipline. Perhaps you are afraid. Perhaps you are simply not trying hard enough. Nietzsche would ask whether this narrative hides something deeper, because motivation is not always a natural force. Often, it is an expectation placed on people by the culture around them. Work should excite you. Your goals should inspire you. Progress should feel energizing. When these feelings are absent, the assumption is that the individual must repair themselves. But Nietzsche believed that what we call weakness is sometimes resistance, a quiet refusal to accept the values that surround us. Someone who stops believing in motivation might be rejecting more than just a feeling. They may be rejecting the demand that life must always look energetic and purposeful. They may be stepping away from the idea that worth is measured by visible drive. In Nietzsche's thought, real strength does not always look enthusiastic. Sometimes it looks calm, even indifferent. A person who moves without needing constant excitement may actually be less controlled by external expectations. Motivation, in that sense, can become a performance. People display it to reassure others that they belong to the same system of values. They talk about passion, drive, and endless improvement because the culture rewards those words. But Nietzsche would remind us that the absence of that performance does not necessarily mean the absence of will. Some people act without the story. They work quietly without needing to feel inspired. They continue even when the emotional energy never arrives. Their effort is not fueled by excitement, but by a more neutral form of persistence. From the outside, this can look like a lack of ambition. From Nietzsche's perspective, it might simply be honesty, a refusal to pretend that life must always feel like a source of motivation in order to be lived. Freud might approach the question of motivation in a very different way. Instead of asking why someone cannot produce motivation, he would ask what might be happening beneath the surface when the expected energy refuses to appear. In Freud's view, human behavior is rarely as simple as it looks. What appears to be laziness, hesitation, or lack of motivation can often be the visible surface of something hidden, a conflict that has not yet been recognized, a resistance that does not fully belong to the conscious mind. When someone says they cannot find the motivation to begin something, Freud would wonder whether another part of the psyche is quietly opposing it. Not loudly, not with clear arguments, but with a subtle withdrawal of energy. This kind of resistance does not always feel dramatic. It often shows up as small delays, a task that keeps getting postponed, a project that seems important but never quite begins. Time passes, and the person may even criticize themselves for not moving forward. But the mind, Freud believed, has ways of protecting itself from things it finds threatening. If an action carries anxiety, fear of failure, fear of judgment, or even fear of success, the psyche may quietly reduce the energy available for it. From the outside, the person appears unmotivated. From the inside, the mind may simply be refusing to step into something it senses will be difficult to face. Freud called this kind of response resistance. It is not always logical, and it rarely announces its reasons clearly. Instead, it diverts attention, lowers enthusiasm, or creates distractions that feel easier to follow. In this sense, the absence of motivation can be a kind of compromise. The person does not openly reject the task. They may even insist that they want to do it. But the unconscious mind slowly removes the energy required to begin. This is why motivational advice sometimes fails to work. Encouragement and enthusiasm speak to the conscious mind. They try to increase excitement or confidence. But if the deeper layers of the psyche remain unconvinced, that extra enthusiasm cannot reach the place where the resistance lives. Freud would say that real change does not happen by increasing motivation alone. It happens by understanding what the mind is quietly avoiding. When someone stops believing in motivation, they may have noticed this pattern. They may have seen that motivation does not always solve the deeper hesitation underneath action. In that sense, the absence of motivation can reveal something honest about the mind. Not a lack of effort, but a hidden conversation between different parts of the self. One part that wants to move forward, and another that is not yet ready to follow. In the world of motivational thinking, few ideas are repeated more often than the belief that success begins with the right mindset. If you believe strongly enough, if you visualize clearly enough, if you keep your thoughts focused on achievement, motivation will appear and carry you forward. This promise sits at the center of much modern self-improvement thinking. It suggests that inner belief is the engine of action. Once you decide what you want and commit to it mentally, the rest will follow. Energy will come. Discipline will grow. Progress will begin. For many people, this idea is powerful. It offers a sense of control. If motivation can be created through belief, then the path forward seems clear. Change the way you think, and your life will begin to move in the direction you want. But not everyone experiences life this way. Some people listen to these promises and quietly feel a distance from them. They hear the certainty in the message, yet their own experience does not match it. belief alone has not produced energy. Visualizing the outcome has not made action easier. The feeling that is supposed to ignite effort simply does not arrive. Over time, this creates a quiet skepticism. Not hostility and not necessarily rejection of ambition itself. Rather, a sense that the motivational promise might be describing something different from what actually happens in daily life. From this perspective, motivation begins to look less like a universal force and more like a story we tell about success after it occurs. When people achieve something meaningful, they often describe the passion or inspiration that drove them forward. But those explanations may come afterward, as a way of organizing the story. Someone who does not believe in motivation might see this pattern clearly. They notice that action often begins in ordinary ways. A task is started simply because it exists. Work continues because it must. Progress happens slowly without dramatic bursts of enthusiasm. The promise that belief will automatically generate energy begins to feel exaggerated. This does not mean the person rejects effort or achievement. What they question is the idea that motivation must come first. Instead, they may come to trust something quieter, the possibility that action can begin without excitement. In that sense, the absence of motivation becomes less frightening. It no longer blocks movement. It simply means that life will not always provide the emotional spark that motivational thinking expects. And once that expectation fades, something interesting happens. The person may continue anyway, not because they feel inspired, not because belief has ignited them, but simply because the next step is there. And sometimes that quiet continuation proves stronger than motivation itself.